Evening, everyone. Glad to see you all here this evening at Asia Society. Welcome. How many of you have been here to a business and policy program before? Okay, it's always just nice to see. I think we have a lot of new faces tonight as well. So welcome. Lead support for business and policy programs is provided by United Airlines, the official airline of Asia Society Texas Center, and by Friends of Business and Policy. So we thank them and thank you for making this program possible. Tonight, I know several of you did receive a complimentary book with your purchase for the program. If you didn't, we do still have a few on sale at the front desk, so please feel free after the program to go grab one. There will be a book signing post-program. Tonight, it is my distinct privilege and honor to introduce you to our two speakers, co-authors for China's Super Consumers. I had a little bit of time with them earlier this evening, and they have fascinating stories that I'm sure you'll hear a lot about. One of them decided to come from Hong Kong to the U.S. and spends most of his time in New York, Savio. And then Michael spends a lot of his time from the U.S. going to China. So they have an interesting partnership and collaboration. So first, let me introduce Savio. He is a preeminent expert on U.S.-China partnerships and building loyalty with Chinese luxury consumers. He serves as CEO of U.S.-China Partners, Inc., a consulting and advisory firm that helps organizations design and implement their consumer strategies. He spent 2 decades as a consultant on market entry, cross-border M&A, and joint ventures partnership innovation with some of the largest and well-known global luxury and consumer brands, Fortune 500, and Chinese large state-owned and private companies. He is a member of National Committee on U.S.-China Relations and a frequent keynote speaker. Michael Zakkour is a principal at the global consulting firm Tompkins International, where he leads the China-Asia-Pacific practice. He is a contributing writer at Forbes. He has more than 18 years' experience in international market strategy and implementation, primarily in China and Asia, where he has assisted more than 300 multinational public and private enterprises on their entry and growth strategies and implementation, including some of the biggest names in retail, entertainment, consumer products, technology, fashion, and luxury. So please help me in welcoming our two presenters this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. We're honored by your presence, and it's an honor to be here at the Texas Asia Society. And this is just really a spectacular building, and I love the Japanese minimalist feel that it evokes, and the gardens and the water. It's just beautiful, and so it's even more of a privilege to be here. Before we get started, I have a question for the audience. How many of you love PowerPoint presentations? Hands, please. That guy, all right. Well, we don't have one tonight, okay? We're here to talk, to tell stories, and to have a conversation with you. So if you think you can handle it without the PowerPoint, sir, we're good to go. So as Kelly said, I'm Michael Zakkour. I'm a principal at Tompkins International. I've been working in China for 15 years, primarily in taking American and European brands, retailers, services, products into the China market, and have gotten pretty familiar with the Chinese consumer over the last 10 years. And Savio Chen, as Kelly said, the CEO of U.S.-China Partners. We've known each other for a long time, and when Wiley came to us, we misheard them. At first, we thought they said, we want to make Rush Hour 6 with you two guys. But it turned out... I
object you, by the way.
Yeah. And I said, you must have me mistaken for somebody else. But they wanted us to write a book about China. And in thinking about what to write about, it became very clear to us through our combined last 25, 30 years of experience that 15 years ago, there were about 100 million people in China who could legitimately be considered consumers. And today, there are 800 million people in China who can be considered consumers. And so this was the biggest story that was changing China and changing the world in the next last 5, next 10 years. And that's what we focused on. So thank you again for coming. And I'm going to turn it over to Savio for an open.
Well, even though we don't have any PowerPoint, but I have all the power, you get all the points. So
that's actually kind of true.
I still remember back in 2008, on January 28th at 9:46 p.m. And as you know, if we're doing our kind of work, our days are very long. For those who doesn't know our work, they think that we are having lunch and dinner and coffee and cocktails all the time. They think it's a cozy job. They doesn't know that we have to work late at night, at 9 o'clock at night, we turn on our computer, make phone calls to China for another 3, 4, 5 hours. So as usual, I was at my computer desk doing my email to China at 9 o'clock at night, 9:30 at night. And all of a sudden, there's an email that came to my desk that almost knocked me off my chair. I still remember that very clearly. It's a very special email from Steve Jobs, chairman of Apple Computers at the time. And on that day, Steve Jobs was launching the MacBook Air. It was the most important product launch for them. He was being challenged by CNBC reporters and saying, "Hey, Steve, how's your iPhone doing in China?" And at that time, Steve Jobs was struggling to do a deal with China Mobile. We signed a deal with them to do a partnership with them, and it's going nowhere. And he was very frustrated, and he somehow, I don't know how he got my email address, he sent me an email at night that day, and he said, "How do I get a deal signed with China Mobile?" At first I said, "Wow, is that really Steve Jobs? Or is it my friend Michael sending me an email just trying to make fun of me?" And I surely realized that this is from Steve Jobs. So I tell him by email, I say, "Steve, even though that you have the best product in the world, the iPhone, and the best company in the world, Chairman Wang from China Mobile is not ready to do a business with you right now." So I say, "Forget about it. He would not do a deal with you. But of course, you're Steve Jobs and you're Apple. Who can resist talking to you, right?" So they would nod and say happy and thank you and all the smiling faces without saying no, but not doing a deal with you. But however, you must get into China right now because China will be your largest market. But they're not ready for you. You should do a deal right now with China Unicom, the number 2 player with a lot less mobile subscribers, but still a major player, and they're ready for you. You're already late to China. So please get in now, sign a deal with China Unicom, and get in, and you make $1 zillion if you do that. Now, Steve Jobs was very type A, obviously, so he was very focused. "I'm Steve Jobs." I said, "Savio, that China Unicom thing you told about, they're a small little company. I only deal with the biggest company, China Mobile. I don't want to deal with a small company. We're Apple." I said, "Steve, you're right. But how many subscribers do you have in China now?" He said, "Well, 0. I said, "Well, China Unicom have 150 million subscribers and customers. And are you realizing that every year you have a few million iPhones that people buy from you and then without turning it on and bring it to China and then turn it on locally?" He said, "Yeah, you're right about that." I said, "Well, you don't get any revenue from that. So please have your team do a deal with China Unicom. Get in now, and once you sign a deal with them, you sell a lot of phones in China, and then 2 years later, China Telecom will sign on, and another 3 years later, which is about last year, then they will have a new chairman from China Mobile, and at that time, they will be ready for you. So please, don't waste your time." And after a lot of debate internally within his team, and he eventually took that advice, and then he do, and the rest is history. So I think that China consumers is really the power and behind that major success in China. And even China Mobile, as Michael and I both know, and as you may know, that until last year, they were number 6 in China. They're not number 1, number 2, number 3, they're number 6 in China. But since it's a good product, they still making so much money and success in China. And that illustrates how important is that even the most successful brand in China need to find the right strategy and the right access to be able to talk to China consumers. And I think that Michael, my more talented partner, and a much better writer than I am, frankly, come up with a term. When I try to say describe, I said, Michael, describe what is China super consumers. Why we should tell our readers, what does it mean? We know that 1.3 billion people, but what is China super consumers? And he came up with a term that I think is brilliant. So I'll let him explain that, Michael.
Thanks, Savio. The term is the China global demographic, or the China global consumer. That you're no longer constrained by the borders of China when you're dealing with Chinese consumers. And I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. We'll hold that thought. But it's useful to step back for a minute and say, okay, we agree there are 800 million Chinese consumers today who, sure, they have different levels of purchasing power. You may have a farmer who, in the last few years, has gone from using charcoal to brush his teeth to using Crest. And you've got billionaires in Shanghai buying 400-foot yachts. So obviously there's a lot of variance between those 800 million consumers. But it's useful to step back for a good second and say, how did we get here? How did we go from 30 years ago, from Chairman Mao, to 2015 and Chairman Ma, Jack Ma, Alibaba?
Mao to Ma.
How did we go from Mao to Ma? How did we go 30 years ago? Chinese women were rubbing their faces and their lips with sandpaper because it was considered bourgeois and anti-revolutionary, and you were a capitalist roader if you were wearing makeup. To 10 years later, you were allowed to wear makeup, but there wasn't any to be had. And here we are in 2015, and the French cosmetics retailer Sephora has 225 stores in China, and their largest flagship store in the world isn't in Paris, or New York, or Rome, or Madrid, in Shanghai. How did we go from sandpaper to Sephora in 30 years? How did we go at 100 from feudalism to Fendi? Where did it come from? In 30 years. 30 years. You have to step back to the 1980s. There were three major trends. I call them super trends. Not that that's terribly original. That all developed during the 80s, and only in the last 7 or 8 years have kind of melded into each other to create one giant super trend. The first one was what we call globalization. And globalization 1.0 started in the 80s, and it largely consisted of rich Western companies sending their sourcing and manufacturing to poor Eastern countries, where they could make the product so cheap that they could make an incredible profit and still offer their customers products for 30 or 40% less than they were buying 5 or 10 years before. It was a perfect system. China and Asia needed the money, they needed the jobs, they needed the development. We needed the products because we were the first hyper-consumer society in world history. Okay? At the same time, about 10 years later, somebody invented HTML, somebody else invented the Mosaic web browser, and the web was born. And obviously, the most important development and evolution of the web was towards e-commerce. So the ultimate evolution of what the web gave us, yes, cat videos are nice, e-commerce is better, right? And then the third, also developed in the 80s and 90s, was for the first time in history, you had a truly connected global supply chain continuum, which basically meant you could move any product anywhere in the world at any time, any way you wanted, and it worked. And so you had the rise of China first as a manufacturer, and then as a consumer society. You had the birth of the internet and the evolution of e-commerce, and you had the ability to move products anywhere in the world. Those three super trends melded into one giant, and they gave birth to 2 babies. They were twins. And they were very cute. One was named Amazon, and the other one was named Alibaba, right? So Amazon and Alibaba are the perfect manifestation of globalization 2.0. Jack Ma and Steve Jobs, and Jeff Bezos, if they were in the room right now, and you ask them, what kind of company do you run? What do you think they'd say? Any guesses? They would tell you, we run supply chain companies with a really cool interface. Everything they do is dependent on Chinese consumers buying stuff, Chinese people making stuff, using e-commerce and the web to sell stuff, and using the modern supply chain to move it anywhere they want to, right? So you're hearing in the news Amazon's trying to come through with same-day delivery. Jack Ma's been doing same-day delivery in China for 7 years. 7 years.
And it's much harder in China when you have to do all this, Kelly would know, right? I mean,
so that is the context for how these super consumers were born. Okay? Those three mega trends gave birth to the China super consumer. And we look at the development of Chinese consumption in three phases. There was the late 90s, the late 80s to the early 90s, even into the mid 90s. And that was the first wave of actual capitalist consumption in China. Largely, those were the first beneficiaries of the opening and reform movement. They were the first entrepreneurs, the first factory owners, the first beneficiaries of foreign direct investment, and they were the first people to have some money in their pockets. And it was largely the European luxury brands who went to China to meet them. And it was a nice marriage. The second phase of Chinese consumption developed, generally speaking, between 1994 and about 2005. That was the period when China went into mass urbanization mode, and you had close to 300 million people move from the farms to the cities. And urbanization led to development, development led to wealth, wealth led to consumerism. And so now you're talking about 400 or 500 million consumers in China, and not all of them relegated to the wealthy coastal cities. And then finally, what we've seen over the last 8 years was the birth of the Chinese super consumer. And we don't call them super consumers because they wear capes and rescue small children and cats in a tree. It's because they are so big in size, they are so powerful in the way they're changing the world, and they have so much disposable income that they're literally changing the world of business, culture, society, global commerce, transportation, e-commerce, and even the environment.
And these China consumers are very nuanced also. They're not the same as what you think we are. Even though we like the same thing, we buy the same Gucci bag and Louis Vuitton bag and a Mace tie, but deep inside, we are very different animals. And if you don't understand the cultural aspect of how we think and how we work, you would not win them over, and you actually might lose them. And of course, like when Costco a few months ago was going on Alibaba and entered China. They have no Costco store in China, even though they're successful in America. And they were worried about how to get in China, so they eventually took the plunge to sell their products through Alibaba's Tmall. So they can sell to all these Chinese consumers. The first day they come out, Chinese consumers go nuts on Costco. Literally. They bought 3 tons of nuts. Okay, number 1 best-selling thing is nuts. Number 2 best-selling is something else. It's all this inexpensive food. In China, they worry about the food source. And so they won't buy anything that's from America that's food, they know it's safe. Nuts, it's good, everybody can buy nuts. And they shipped $35 million in their first month of sale. They're just doing some testing, right? And smart enough, since they have no warehouse, no physical space in China, they did not charge any membership. They changed their model a little bit to adapt. to the Chinese consumers. Because believe me, if you charge them a membership, they would not buy. It's very different. A lot of companies may not understand how to sell to Chinese consumers, and they just try to transport their American model to China. Say, hey, we bring you the best practice. It works in America. Let's do it in China. And they just fall flat on their face 9 out of 10 times. Perfect example. Best Buy. When you go to China, they just move the same model in China, open the same big box store in China, and try to compete with all the local top stores. And they didn't do well. They were miserable. They really have a lousy outcome. To top it off, they didn't even do a research. They didn't hire Michael to find the right names. They translate their name into some stupid names, stupid Chinese names that if you can't know what they say in the Chinese, they say, what are you talking about? They translate Best Buy in Mandarin Chinese into 白痴买, which literally means you have to think 100 times before you buy. Who would think 100 times before I buy if you have Best Buy? Then of course there's no customer. So Chinese consumers are very nuanced in many, many ways. And if you don't understand the culture, you don't have to be bilingual or speak Mandarin like Kelly does, which is good. It's nice that you do that, but you have to be bicultural. You have to understand the history and culture and let that be your guide. And in fact, when I wrote the book with Michael, I was so impressed that he knows more about Chinese history than I do. Even though his Mandarin is nowhere close to my Mandarin, but his Chinese history is really, really good.
My Cantonese rocks, though.
And then he understands the culture. And that's why he was able to guide all these people. And after we wrote the book, we were just constantly being invited by chairman and CEO of these major luxury brands to have lunch and dinner. I said, wow, that's pretty cool. I was having lunch with the Pauline Brown, the chairman of LVMH, who own all these luxury brands. And when I said, I want to invite you to lunch, to talk about some business in China. I said, oh, that's pretty cool. He's the chairman of LVMH. Maybe you should like that I'm good looking, No, it's not something that I'm good looking. I think that I just want to pick my brain for 2 hours for lunch. It's a cheap day for him, for her. So we learned that even the most advanced company are trying to fine-tune their model. And we talk about how you have to use the tools that they use in China to communicate and engage them. You cannot use Facebook, you cannot use Pinterest. Those tools doesn't work in China. If you apply those tools, you go nowhere. So you have to really understand what kind of tool they use and how to apply those tools to them.
So, the book is really, it's a culture and history book disguised as a business book. Hopefully, when you open the book and you start reading it, you're going to realize it's probably somewhere around page 85 before we even start talking about business. My experience in China was deep and immediate cultural immersion. And I think, hopefully, how I've been useful to people over the years is, to act as a human bridge between the two cultures. And so immersing myself in the language and the culture and the philosophy and the history and really loving that. And so we open the book with the history, language, culture, mindset, and philosophy, right? Because those are the things that are actually going to create the mindset that creates the purchase motivator. And so the mistake a lot of Western companies make is they see Chinese men walking around in Xenia suits and Chinese women carrying Prada bags and both of them drinking a fine Bordeaux and driving BMWs, and they think, you see, they finally came around to our way of life, right? The good life, consumerism, capitalism. They want the same stuff we want, and I'm going to sell it to them. The problem, though, is why you're buying that Bordeaux and why you're buying that BMW and why you're buying that Prada bag is 180 degrees opposite from why him, her, and him are buying the same product. And the answer lies in studying and understanding culture, history, philosophy, mindset, and purchase motivators. And so really the book it hopefully gives readers a grounding in all of those things, plus a brief, very brief history of consumerism in China, or I should say the non-history of consumerism in China. So again, when we look at consumerism, China's been around for 4,000 years. It's had a consumer society for 20. But then again, we look at market size and potential, 1.3 billion people. Currently, the largest consumer society on earth, and probably only for another year or two, is the United States. We have 300 million people. We're China's rounding error. China's rounding error. There are 300 million people in the United States. There are 550 million people shopping online in China every day. 550 million people. 250 million more people than we have living in the third most populous country on earth. Okay? But you will never reach them, and you will never succeed with them if you can't think like them. So when we're looking at why things happen in China, right? What's important to the consumer? Relationships, trust, peer recommendation, their guanxi or relationship network, right? All the things that are important to Chinese people in their everyday lives are important to Chinese people when they're engaging with brands and products and services, right? It's still being debated in the United States whether social media is actually having any effect on companies and brand sales. They've shown some results in digital marketing. We're largely seeing the advertising on the internet industry dying. In China, it's actually proven already that good social media can boost your sales 150 to 250% if done correctly. So if you're asking Chinese consumers, what is the most important way for you to find out about new products or to buy products that you want? It's peer recommendation through social media. I had a client, I won't mention their name, but they are one of the 3 largest luxury jewelry companies in the United States. They are based in New York. And they came to me after having made a single effort, solo effort play in China. And a lot of times people come to me after they've failed. I prefer they come to me before, but it happens. And they came to me and said, you know, we had everything right, the right product mix. They had a high brand awareness of us, and all the research was right, and they knew us from New York and around the world. And we rolled out this massive marketing campaign, and it just didn't happen. We don't know what happened. I said, well, tell me about your marketing. Where were you advertising? And they told me where. Turned out they were doing what they did everywhere else in the world, which was advertise their very high-end jewelry to consumers between 45 and 65 years old, because those are the millionaires. The average millionaire in the United States is 55 years old. The average millionaire in China is 37. Oops. Wrong magazines, wrong websites, wrong TV shows, wrong social media. Nobody was listening.
Well, and also, you have to really understand to build trust with them, use different tools, like Michael said earlier, and to engage and earn their trust and to do business to China consumers, you do not have to be a large, well-known brand like Louis Vuitton and all this Gucci brand. You could be in services, you could be in America, you can still do business with them. In our book, we talk about a case study about someone in real estate, and she's been helping these young children get apartments in New York City. And along the way, she built trust with all these young children, young students from colleges. And they tell her parents about how nice is this young lady helping them to find apartment buildings in New York City. And one day, they used this tool called WeChat from Tencent Holdings.
How many of you are on WeChat?
You know WeChat?
That's pretty good, actually.
That's right.
There you go.
So today, only about 500 million people is on WeChat. Only. But the most amazing part is this lady instead of trying to use WeChat to sell anything, she wants to use it to do article about living in America, how's it like in America, a life in the day of living in America. So he wrote a very beautiful journal every now and then to tell about her life. And along the way, all these parents read about her life and get to know her, and the kids all know her. And one day she got a webmail, from a chat from WeChat from one of the parents from China. He said, "Hey, I saw that there's a beautiful apartment in Manhattan next to Museum of Modern Art. It's called the Zakkour building. It's not finished yet. I like the apartments there. Could you help me look at the apartments, please? I want to buy one for my daughter who lives in New York City, who goes to school in New York City." So this lady, Emma, her name is Emma. Emma went to the address, went into the building and checked it out, took some pictures, using WeChat, sent it back to the parents. It's a very expensive high-end apartments, the one that Kelly and Michael live all the time. And the low end is like a studio, it's like $3 million. The low end floor, the high end floor is like $11, $12 million, for a 2-bedroom. But it's a beautiful place. Every floor have a chandelier, from backward, so that's why they call it, the name. So long story short, she's very smart. She used this WeChat social media tool to show the pictures, the informations, and the parent showed very strong interest to buy it. And then she's so smart that she looped the lawyer into the whole private network. So that when they communicate, they instantaneously get all the information. And it turns out that last year, she sold 2 apartments to the same parent, one $3 million on the low floor studio, and one $10 million on the higher floor, $13 million, 2 apartments, all for WeChat, sight unseen. She never came here in America. Just all do wire transfer. But that is not untypical if you know how to build trust with them. So I want to tell you that story because so that if you are in services in America, there are opportunities that you can engage and build trust with them in the right tool. And if you know how to do that, not through Facebook or other tool, you could be successful. And it's not changing so fast, Michael, as you know, that just 3 years ago, we'll be using a different tool called Sina Weibo. And today, the last 2.5, 3 years, they all moved to WeChat. So it's constantly changing the tools. So if you pay attention to what tool they're using today, 2 years from now, who knows, right? But the matter of the fact is, today there's 500 million people on that system. And everybody who I know who is Chinese or Chinese American use them. So if you want to talk to them, that's the tool.
So earlier, that's a great segue for earlier, I'd asked you to hold on to the thought about this idea of what we call the China global demographic or the China global consumer, right? That is part of the phenomenon that is taking place. So as recently as even 6 years ago, going to China literally meant for a brand or a retailer or a company going to China. It was all about moving some operations there, getting into a joint venture, setting up a wholly owned foreign enterprise, building a physical infrastructure, hiring people, selling physical products person to person, company to person, and that was China. And it was a great opportunity for a long time, and it still is. But what's happened over the last 5 years is China has actually broken free of its borders. Chinese consumers have broken free of their borders, and they've become global citizens, and they've become global consumers. When we started writing the book, to give you an idea of how fast things can change, when we started writing the book, we were writing about the potential for phones, mobile handsets in China. And the most accurate number I had at that time was that there were 900 million mobile handsets in use in China. The book came out 6 months later, 7 months later, and there were 1.2 billion mobile handsets in use in China.
Only 300 million more.
300 million in 7 months were added, right? And so this is what we've seen, this rapid change. When we wrote the book, we pointed out that about 100 million Chinese took outbound trips from China in 2014. Not only was that the most numerous, number one in volume in the world, but Chinese consumers spent $8,000 per capita per trip. Highest in the world. Put that in perspective, your average American spends $2,700 per capita per outbound trip. Okay?
Oh, let's go ahead. There's also a nuance there because even though they spend so much money on buying all these products, they don't spend much on hotel. They will spend $99 and pack 5 people in a Motel 6 and drop $8,000 on Fifth Avenue or all this fancy store. So you have to understand the psyche behind that to really service them.
Right. That's a good point. And so when we wrote the book, we predicted that maybe as many as 140 or 150 million Chinese would make outbound trips in 2015. And even more significantly, it would go from an average of 1 to 2 trips per person per year to 3 to 4 trips per person per year. And that number was looking really, really good until I went to a dinner for the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations Gala in New York City. And I'm enjoying a fine Bordeaux and a salad. And Henry Kissinger comes up on stage and says, ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement we just found out 2 hours ago. China and America, President Xi and President Obama have just announced a mutual 10-year visa agreement between China and the U.S. That means citizens of both countries can get a 10-year visa and come and go as many times as they want. Well, you can just throw my $150 million, the 150 million people prediction in the garbage. Garbage. That could be 300 million in the next 5 years. So what's happening, though, with the China global demographic is they're traveling. They're more sophisticated. You have second and third generation consumers. They're investing in real estate in New York, LA, Seattle, Vancouver, Toronto, Rome, Paris, Houston. In fact, in New York right now, 28% of every foreign real estate buyer is Chinese. The Chinese are also investing in businesses in the U.S. There's a program you may have heard about called the EB-5 visa. Anybody know what that is? So a Chinese citizen can EB-5 visa, which basically means if they invest $500,000 in a business in the U.S. or hire 10 people, they're on the fast track to a green card. Okay. You've got companies like WH Group, who 2 years ago bought the largest pork products company in the world, Smithfield. It was the largest investment by a Chinese company in American history, $5 billion. They are investing in experiential luxury. It's not just about the bling anymore. It's let's go to Alaska and go fishing. It's let's sit courtside at a Knicks game. So you have this development of experiential luxury. So real estate. Oh, education. Record 240,000 Chinese students studied in the U.S. this year, and that's expected to go up. Another 150,000 to 180,000 in Europe. So you've got 400,000 Chinese students a year studying at European and American universities. So what's happening is this China global demographic is this cohort of about 300 million Chinese who travel, who invest, who have second and third generation wealth. They're educating their kids overseas. They're truly global consumers. And what's interesting about it is we saw the same pattern with the first set of super consumers. Who was the first set? Anybody know?
Japanese.
Americans. Hyperconsumption was born in America in 1946. Right? So the post-war generation, they built houses, they bought cars, they filled their houses with stuff. The disposable society was born. Sam Walton came along in 1962. And so we were the first super consumers. And as we got wealthy, what did we do? We developed a car culture. We started traveling the world, developed a reputation as the ugly Americans, just as some Chinese are developing a reputation as the ugly Chinese when they're traveling abroad. So all these patterns are repeating themselves. And so these Chinese global demographics. So what does it mean if you're a brand or a retailer? It means it's no longer enough for you to engage Chinese consumers in China. You need to engage them in the United States, in Europe, in China, in Australia, and integrate everything you're doing with your brand messaging, your brand positioning, your pricing, your merchandising, your brand story, your e-commerce, right? It goes back to the 3 mega trends. And the twins of Amazon and Alibaba, that's the world these people are living in. And this is the world they want to engage you in if you're willing to meet them halfway in the hallway of cultural relevancy.
And even for products that, because there's such a large pool of Chinese consumers, now with internet, with the e-commerce, with Alibaba, even you can get a very small piece of the pie is still meaningful. So for example, everybody knows that NBA is doing really well in China. NBA have 150 million fans in China, right? So Chinese will understand basketball. We have Yao Ming from here, we understand NBA. But NFL, National Football League, is the #1 sport in America. But we Chinese people don't understand NFL. So what are you guys doing there? What kind of game is that? The rules are complicated. But they're in China for many years, trying to develop their fan base and promote the sports. And they were just trying very hard and not much of success. But still, NFL have 3 million fans in China. Well, you say 3 million out of 1.3 billion is nothing. Well, yeah, but it's still 3 million fans. So using the internet, using Tmall from Alibaba, they do a test. They say, you know what? What can we sell? Do we can sell our jersey, our helmets, the football in China out of these 3 million fans? Now, they also know that the fan base is so small, they cannot open a store in Beijing or Shanghai. The rent is going to kill them, right? But because the fan is so big, the e-commerce is so big, so many people buying things, even if you get a small piece of the action, you can win. So allow you to do incremental sales. So e-commerce, they do a test with this company called Export Now. They put 36 football on the e-commerce site Alibaba, Tmall, and see would they sell. Guess what? They were gone, all gone in 3 minutes. So, they buy football. They still don't know. So they say, let's do another test. So now they put 360 footballs onto the site and do another test. See if they sell. Well, maybe they won't sell that much. It's also gone in a couple of days. So now today, NFL has a full-fledged e-commerce store selling everything from jerseys to helmets to footballs on Alibaba Tmall. So they're generating millions of business. Now, it's not a big business, but it's big enough to make a profit. Why I'm telling you that? Even for things that we don't understand, you have a fan base there. It's the law of large numbers, right? So you can do that. Even if you're NFL, you can still make money in China. Think about it.
I think it's almost time to move on to some Q&A, but to come full circle, it was a good thing that Steve Jobs did listen to Savio 8 years ago. I don't know if some of you saw the news out of Apple about 3 weeks ago. They released their quarterly earnings. They had their highest quarterly earnings in history, and they attributed it to sales in China. And they are no longer the #6 smartphone by volume brand in China. They're #2.
And in parallel track to that, how many of you heard about a company called Xiaomi? If you're Chinese, you know Xiaomi, or if you are reading the Chinese thing. Xiaomi is a brand new company from China that are only 4 years old. They've been only in business for 4.5 years. In 4.5 years' time, this Xiaomi, they created a smartphone with the same bell and whistles as Apple and Samsung does, and sell the phone at half the price, directly through e-commerce to all the consumer. There's no store to save the overhead costs. In 4 years' time, he stimulated the Chinese consumers to be fans of them. They become the #3 smartphone manufacturer in the world. 4 years behind Apple and Samsung, and number 1 in China. And last month, they broke a world record. They raised $1.1 billion at evaluations to push the company have a $45 billion evaluations, making them the most valuable product company in the world beyond Uber. Uber's number 2, number 1. 4 years old. Whether it's Apple, whether it's Xiaomi, if you pay attention and know how to engage with the China consumers, you'll be a very happy camper. And I hope you will do the same. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead and open up for question and answer. We do ask that you keep your questions to questions and not commentary. You will have a moment when they're doing book signing to chat with them more. So let's open it up for questions.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you're supposed to do that, not me. It's on you now.
Okay, back.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if Alibaba is that huge, how does a person who's a foreigner be able to compete as an e-commerce site?
Okay, great question. So let's start with how huge is Alibaba?
Huge.
Okay. Alibaba, through its various internet platform properties, generated $250 billion in revenue in 2014. Okay? Who's the number 2? They're number 1. Who's number 2? Amazon. They generated $100 billion. Who's number 3? eBay. They generated $76 billion. That means Alibaba generated almost $100 billion more in online commerce than the number 2 and 3 companies in the world. That's how huge they are. So let's start with that. And they're coming to America. Okay. The good thing is Jack Ma is a genius. He is one of my heroes, not only as a business person, but as a human being. This guy is so smart, he runs circles around all of his competition. 75% of every e-commerce transaction in China, even if they're not buying from Alibaba, goes through an Alibaba system. Okay? So they have Tmall, which is the business-to-consumer platform. And so this is where brands and retailers, big ones with a lot of cash, go to set up their shop. And it gives the Chinese consumer an absolute 100% assurance. It's like they're shopping in the Polo Ralph Lauren store or in the Tiffany store. It's no different. And so that's one way. Then there's also something called Taobao, which is Alibaba's consumer-to-consumer marketplace. And so that is like a beefed-up version of eBay. But what's really becoming a game changer is Alibaba, just in the last couple months, released something called ePass and Alibaba Global. And the combination of ePass and Alibaba Global means that almost anybody from the mom and pop merchant on the corner to billion-dollar corporations can now start selling to Chinese consumers through the Alibaba platform. But the 2 big things that are going to happen with Alibaba in the coming 2 years is this. They are coming to America. They started testing an American e-commerce platform in August called 11main.com. And so they're going to come and learn about how American e-commerce works there. And number 2, they're taking all of the money that they raised in their IPO, and they're going to build an enhanced global supply chain network. Jack Ma thinks the only thing that's stopping him from going from $250 to $550 billion in China is a crappy supply chain network. And so he's going to be coming and building supply chain in the US, supply chain in China. He's going to integrate the 2, and you are going to be anywhere in the world, you're now an Alibaba customer.
Hi, I was curious if you could make a comment about, you've mostly been talking about consumer goods, and I work in the book business, for example, and if you look at movies and books and film, I'm curious what your opinion is on selling to the Chinese consumer in those areas, whether there is an opportunity to export to China with that type of material or not. And I'm not talking necessarily about the obvious stuff like Transformers, which was the highest grossing movie in China last year, but something more nuanced than the general globalized commercial product in culture?
Well, I think that you have already, as you may aware, that Dalian Wanda, one of the largest Chinese companies, already bought AMC movie chain in America, and he's developing their own Chinese Hollywood in China right now. So he's really trying to develop the content, all these things. So there are companies. I'll give a perfect example. One of our friends, Peter Cunha, who's also endorsed the book on the back cover, he was the former CEO of Marvel Comics. So Marvel was a Disney for $4.3 billion. Wait for the company expire. Now he's the chairman and CEO of a company called Value, which is the third largest comic books company in America, besides DC Comics and Marvel, right? So he's doing the same playbook to have 2 movies coming out next year by Sony Columbia Pictures, and he just raised $20 million from China to do his movie fund. So now you have Chinese investor who actually invest in your product, so they want to get the success of the track record like Marvel did. So then now they're going to, when this product come out, whether it's movies or comic books, the Chinese investor will be very interested to have them move there. So there's a lot of interest on those cultural products, whether it's books and movie.
The bottom line is one of the fastest growing sectors in China is entertainment and intellectual property, vehicles and property. So American movies, foreign movies, TV shows. I was on TV a couple months ago talking about that Top Gear. Does anybody here know Top Gear, the British show about cars? It's actually the most watched real life, not reality show, but fact-based show in the world. It's watched by 225 million people in 100 countries. And they've just extended the franchise to China. And they've hired Chinese hosts, and they're going to do it all in China. This is huge money. So I don't know, there may be a niche market for if you're talking about highbrow literature, but in general, intellectual property and content is going to be one of the 4 fastest growing sectors in China. Correct.
All this expansion, the capitalist type of expansion, progress that China is making, will they ever get rid of communism?
No, they won't. But they will do it in the Chinese way. Because they learn from all the other, system and countries.
Will they ever give up communism, I think, is the question. I would just interject there. They've already given up communism. I think what you're really asking, will they ever give up one-party authoritarianism? Because they gave up communism 25 years ago. Yeah, go ahead.
That would be so functional, even helping to landing on the moon. They need a smartphone that when you pick up the phone outside of the pocket, that people even 3 miles away, they can instantly know that that's the newest Apple smartphone. And now the 6 Plus comes out instantly. All my friends in China ask me to buy one cheap for them. And it's the most popular, asking product so far.
Well,
I don't have a specific page for that. So I just wondering, could you talk about the consumer behavior right now?
Well, one of the key factors of this about culture, right? What we can buy, right? Anything that can enhance their status symbol of the Chinese for the Chinese people, they will buy. And if it's a foreign brand, if it's the best product, make them look richer, more powerful, more smart, more hip, more cool, they will buy. Like you say, the 6S, the 6 and the 6 Plus product, It's such a big phone. When they pull it out, not only they pull it out, they do it in slow motion. My phone. You want that? You want that? So, because they know that if you have that phone, you're cool, you are stylish, you are smart,
You're rich.
You're rich. So anything that enhances their face of Chinese people and their status would go. In China, if you're foreign products, now Xiaomi is a local product. If you're a foreign brand, like a US brand or European brand, you're going to go big, you're going to go premium, or go home. Go big, go premium, that would be a good chance to win. Otherwise, it's going to have to be the game. But that's psychology of Chinese people. We love foreign stuff much better than our local stuff.
We have a question over here.
Would you talk about Kentucky Fried Chicken and the fact that the Chinese people are unforgiving sometimes if they make a mistake with hygiene and then with the chicken problem, and they've never recovered from it, I don't think. Would you comment on Kentucky Fried Chicken in China?
Well, if you study KFC, it's a tremendous successfully history for 20, 30 years. Tremendously. And in fact, KFC, the leader, Sam Shu, who's the one who's the Chinese CEO of KFC, for the last 20, 30 years, until very lately, has been so successful. And that makes KFC the largest and most successful quick service restaurant chain in the whole world, not only China. And they make so much profit. Lately, for the last couple of years, for the last 1.5, 2 years, they're having some challenges. But I would disagree that they are not, they're not unforgiving. They are having some issues. They're slowing their growth a little bit, but they're still very, very popular in China. And you may not know that. Some of you may know that KFC also owns a very successful Chinese fast food restaurant chain in China. You know that? It's called East Dawning. And they're very smart, supply chain. On the same strip mall, you have KFC. And they're so good in delivering the products and ingredients. They say, hey, there's no Chinese chain fast food restaurant that are good in China. So they developed one called East Dawning. So it's right next to KFC normally. So on the mall on this side, you have KFC. And on that side, it's Chinese chicken. It's Chinese food. And I tried it myself a couple of years ago. Man, it was cheap. It was fast. It was tasty. I wish they were in America. And no matter how much you love KFC chicken, chicken Monday, chicken Tuesday, chicken Wednesday, you're going to change to Chinese food sometime, right? So they're smart to leverage the supply chain to develop it. So they're actually still very successful in China. Very few chains, actually, none of the chains that I know of are coming close to that, quite frankly. So they're still very successful.
What about consumer behavior for experiences, similar to what that man was talking about with film, but what about with live theater?
Right. So that's a big growth area. So they're going to Broadway now.
Yeah.
They're going to basketball games. They're going to sporting events. They're, going to Las Vegas, and they're not just gambling. They're going out to a gun range and firing a .50 caliber machine gun. We had one guy, I tell a story in the book, very wealthy Chinese gentleman, and he was a golf fanatic. And he wanted to play Pebble Beach, which he could have done, but he wanted to play Pebble Beach with the #3 golfer on the PGA Tour, which is a little bit more difficult. And anyway, through a partner of mine, we arranged for him to play Pebble Beach with the #3 ranked golfer in the world, and they struck up a friendship and did some business deals. But the point is, all of his wealthy friends could go and play Pebble Beach. He wanted to play Pebble Beach with the #3 golfer. So, going to Alaska, going, on hunting, it's experiencing the world. And, the old stereotype of the Chinese tour bus, going through Europe and doing, 14 cities in 15 days, and literally just not absorbing any culture, forget the museums. It was, get in front of the Eiffel Tower, get in front of the Coliseum and move on. Now they're actually spending time. And again, you look for these patterns. What did Americans do in the 60s? They went on these tours to 8 European cities in 9 days. And so you're just seeing this maturing consumer really becoming more sophisticated about experience. And it's become more about personal well-being, right? So the #1 selling white goods product in China, it's not dishwashers, it's not laundromat, it's not dryers. It's, you know what it is? Anybody guess? For the home electronic? Air filters. Every Chinese home has 3 or 4 air filters in it. And so they buy American vitamins, supplements, air filters. They want to feel good about themselves.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Consumer behavior and cultural, what are the major barriers for an American to own and establish a business in China?
If you're not in a China-restricted industry, very little, if any. So China has a list of industries that are basically completely off limits due to national security. So if you're going in, think you're going to set up, start drilling for oil in China, that's not going to happen. So they have a list of forbidden, national security. After that, there's everything you can do, and then there are actually a list of industries they're encouraging you to come and get involved in, and they provide incentives for. But if you're getting into consumer, product, retail, industrial, B2B, the restrictions, even 15 years ago, 12 years ago, for almost any industry, you had to enter into a JV with a Chinese company. That's largely gone away. So, in China, there's a saying, anything is possible, nothing is easy.
Okay, last question.
Thank you very much for a very, very nice session, without the PowerPoint. What I am thinking is, do you think your concept about being engrossed in the culture is contradictory in the future, because the kids, like you said, are getting educated outside? And so is the mindset essentially not going to be just based on culture of China, rather on the global economy? So I think the fact that somebody needs to know China to do business may be contradictory. Thank you.
Well, obviously, if they're 45 years old, man, woman, they are different thinking than the 25-year-old and 30-year-old who are much more exposed to technology, and they may went out to foreign countries to study in America, in the UK. But still, the 5,000 years of values of Confucius still run deep in the majority of the people there. So if you know those values, you'll be surprised. Even the young people are being affected by that without you knowing it. So that's why we say that you have to understand the culture, even though it's changing, obviously. But if you master the value system and the cultural roadmap of China, then you can much better be able to win them over easily. Yeah. Thank you. Great.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, So I'd like to invite you all out in the Water Garden Terrace. We will have a table for book signing. I welcome you all to head that way. Please let our authors head that way. Don't stop them. You're welcome to talk to them when you're getting your book signed. Thank you.